There has been a lot of anguish over the little girl who was thrown from the Westgate Bridge by her father, a 4-year-old, dead. And we know it as a shocking tragedy. But did you give a thought for her 2 brothers? No doubt witnessing their parents quarrelling over a long period of time. Then to witness their father's action, the trauma of their sister's death, the loss of their father into a long-term jail. How will 2 kids recover from all of that? Real life means we need to talk about such things and how we can find resilience to be able to get on with life after terrible things happen. Dr. Ellen Basuk, in her recent article in one of the psychiatric journals, wrote, "Many children, even the majority of children, hold their own and even thrive in the face of adversity." Yes, they do. But then a researcher from Melbourne University, with depressing pessimism, said we have to expect that psychological issues will emerge over the coming months and years as a result of various traumas experienced by some survivors. Well, his views, let me say this, his views are one of those maybe statements and ought not to be made because they're not based on any scientific evidence, but they do become part of common belief and folklore. What he omitted to say was many people discover a surprising resilience. Many people learn ways to be resilient. Many people become part of a community of resilience. And many people become carriers of a spiritual resilience in their lives. All of which, you see, makes so much overfunded research so utterly discardable, even before it gets into the journals. Say nothing about getting into the daily newspapers. This last week, a man sat with me. He's been in jail for 4 years for a misdemeanor that he wishes to God he could have avoided. He wishes he could have swerved away at that vital moment and never become involved in something that landed him in jail for 4 years. Now, he could spend years turning over what he did, what they did, his remorse, and that his life has been ruined. Instead, he said to me, he looked at me and he said, "It's what happens after. That's what matters, isn't it? It's what happens after. That's what happens, isn't it?" Resilience, you see, is that lift that happens after the event, after the distress, after your failure, after the bump in the road, after your bereavement, after the relationship breakdown, whatever. Back in the 1990s when I was teaching a trauma therapy class, we focused a great deal on the work of a man called Charles Carver, an American. And he said there were 4 responses to distressing events. Of course, you can succumb and become miserable for the rest of your days. Or secondly, you can struggle on impaired and injured. Or thirdly, you can recover your prior state before it happened. And that he said was resilience. Or the fourth was to get beyond recovery, to actually thrive. And some of you who have been with me through this series know that I've been also talking about thriving as an important issue in the aftermath of our distressing events. Resilience meant recovering to the point and place before the event took place. But when you come to think about that, and you come to think about specific events that you would know about, we see that some further elaboration is necessary. Take the example, do I have it here? No, I don't. I thought I had the magazine here, which showed the picture of Kim Phuc, a 9-year-old girl, Vietnamese girl, in fact. You've seen the picture. All of us have seen the picture. She's running naked, screaming, towards a cameraman of the Vietnam War, burned horrifyingly by an American napalm bomb dropped on a civilian population. The cameraman actually got an award for such a photograph. Maybe the general who ordered the bombing got an award too. But there was no award for the little girl screaming in pain. But what happened to her? What happened? After years of painful burn therapy, that little girl, now of course an adult woman, found the capacity to forgive those who did such a terrible thing. And she now works for world peace and healing. That's resilience. It might even be thriving. I go one step further and say that's enhancement. Enhancement to herself, but enhancement of the world. Her body could never recover its original state. Her mind, of course, will carry deeply scarred memories of that day and indeed of the whole dreadful war. But her spirit, you see, there is a distinction, isn't there? Dr. Edith Grotberg wrote, "Resilience is the human capacity to face, overcome, and be strengthened by, and even transformed by, the adversities of life." And so the study of resilience is so very important. I mentioned last week the several articles published in American psychological journals on resilience. And so I'll go a little further and mention today the Harvard Business Review some years ago published an article on resilience. The Journal of Social Issues publishes a whole journal on resilience. And the latest edition of, yes, I do have this one, of Scientific American has published a major article, How Minds Bounce Back, Where We Get the Strength to Go On, the Neuroscience of Resilience. We have learned a great deal about the resilience of the human body. How, given certain circumstances, the body begins to heal. Sometimes without external help, sometimes, of course, with external help. The body, resilience. We're now recognizing more than ever before the resilience of the mind and how important that is as we put our hurtful memories into a better perspective, as we gather a different worldview that places our bereavements into a necessary healing narrative, as we discover a capacity to recover from our disappointments and our disagreements. That's the resilience of the mind. We're also more aware today of a community of resilience. You heard the Prime Minister of New Zealand and the Prime Minister of Japan struggling to find the right words to point their people to the resources of resilience after their earthquakes. So much there, you see, about resilience. But the spirit of resilience, that's different. And though it is of major importance, isn't it? It is of major importance, the resilience of the spirit. Do you realize that theologians and preachers don't know how to talk about it? And the psychologists, until quite recently, wouldn't have a bar of it? Oh no. Spirit resilience, the resilience of the spirit, is about developing and owning our soft emotions, our enhancing emotions, our best emotions. But it is greater than our emotions. It is about our inspirational energy. Where does that come from? It is about coming out of our enclosed thinking and our enclosed constraints. Professor George Vaillant, I've quoted him many times before, reminded us of the Greek myth of Icarus. He equipped himself with a pair of wax wings. And when he rises triumphantly and joyously towards the sun, who should tell him to be careful but, of course, his father? His father said his wings will melt. And so in Bruegel's painting, we see Icarus falling to his death. How sad. What a waste of joy. Professor Vaillant goes on, he said, after all, he said, the sun is 93 million miles away, and air grows cooler as we ascend. Flying high does not melt wings, he says, it makes them stronger. But human beings constrain each other from too much joy. Is it because they fear falling, or is it because they're not too sure about the joy? They don't want to see too many people liberated and free to fly through life joyfully. Well, you'll say, what's this got to do with the Sunday morning address? Let me point to the scriptures I took today. Just 3 themes. In the epistle, the second letter to the Corinthians, the words of a resilient spirit. It said, be drawn into a new way of being. After all that has happened, now be drawn into a new way of being. Or the psalm, go back to the psalm, Psalm 137. It said, we will be lifted to sing once more the songs of a better way. Or third, you can go to the gospel reading of the Lazarus story, all too often interpreted ridiculously as a literal story. The Passion speaks to all who get stuck in their caves. And the resilient word is this: come on out. There is more living to be done. So then, resilience. Resilience in general terms, and resilience in specific terms of the human spirit. Many of you say to me, look, come on, tell us, give us specific ways to do these things. How can we regain and redevelop our resilience when it's gone out the door? So here are 4 or 5 short snippets for you. Given the fact that every distress, every failure, every trauma, of course, is different. Resilience. Resilience may bring a right healing environment. If you can find a right healing environment, resilience may emerge. Resilience, secondly, resilience if you focus on a new interest. After your loss, after your damage, after what's happened, focus again on a new pathway, a new cause, a new object, a new person. Very difficult, but that's the focus. Or thirdly, take action to be part of a group to belong, a group that is uplifting, a group energy. Way back in the early days of Ken Miller, I established what was called the community program. I've spoken about it here. We had many groups there going, activities, singing and painting and drama and craft, all the rest. Resilience, you see, for people who'd been through some terribly difficult times. It was lived, resilience was lived out in those groups every night of the week as people sang together, did things together, belonged together. That's the third thing. Take action to be part of a group. Fourth, resilience can mean rolling your heavy stones away, listening to the positive voices calling you out of your cave-like constrictions and discovering a new faith for a new way to live. So there are 4 things. So then what of the resilience of the human spirit? Come down to specifically look at the human spirit. And here I'm talking about the vital inner energy, the very core of your being where resilience really matters. Listen to this poem. There is a quiet water in the center of my soul, where a son or daughter can be taught what no man knows. There is a fragrant garden in the center of your soul, where the weak can harden and the narrow mind can grow. There is a rolling river in the center of your soul, an eternal giver with a rich and endless flow. So remain with me then to pursue another goal and to find your very best freedom in the center of your soul. Resilience of the Spirit in the center of your soul. We know that a resilient spirit can happen. It is an awareness of an inner strength that sometimes calls us into action, that sometimes we call into action, and sometimes it just appears, almost as a surprise. That inner strength, the awareness of it. Second, a resilient spirit recognizes that we need to release ourselves from our past cave-like experiences. We need to release ourselves or be released so that we can come on out and live. Thirdly, resilience of the human spirit is a discovery and a development of the best human emotions, the softening and the strengthening emotions, the development of our highest emotional maturity, our best emotional growth, such that we are free to sing the songs of a better way. That was the third one. And the fourth. Resilience is more than that self-assurance which says, you know all that you need to know. It is about the enhancement of the self, the ongoing enhancement of self that carries an enhancement to others. That's really good resilience. That not only do we get it happening in ourselves, but there's an enhancement that flows to others. And fifth, resilience of the human spirit is about our sources of inspiration. We've had a few here today. A few. Did you notice them? One after the other occurred today in this very place. Sources of inspiration. Our connection with the energy of a greater faith, an energy of faith, affirming that there is a bigger life and it is worth being in that bigger life. There it is. We all need different expressions and experience of that resilience to help us get through and beyond the adversities that inevitably occur. And we all know resilient people. Look for them because they inspire us. They seem to soar in spite of the hardship and the trauma they face. In fact, the most resilient people seek out new and challenging experiences because they've learnt. They've learnt that it's only through struggle, through pushing themselves to the limits, that they will experience their horizons. Oh yes, and then I'd like to remind you of a story, again told by Professor Valent. He mentions that at the end of the Second World War, 1945, when they were clearing out the concentration camps of Germany and Europe, in the Ravensbrück concentration camp, where so many people had suffered for several years, they discovered a tiny piece of screwed up paper. And when they unrolled that piece of paper, they discovered that someone who had lived in that concentration camp had written a prayer. A prayer. Would you believe it? And these are the words of the prayer. I shall read them to you. It said, "O Lord, remember not only the men and women of goodwill, but all those of ill will. But do not remember all the suffering they inflicted on us. Remember the fruits we have brought. Thanks to this suffering, our comradeship, our loyalty, our humility, our courage, our generosity, the greatness of our hearts. which has grown out of all this. And when they come to judgment, let all the fruits that we have borne be their forgiveness. So whether we look back on such times, or whether you focus on the issues of your life as adversities do occur, whatever those adversities may be, there's a point where you draw the line, and beyond that line, you need to live. And remember those words of a man given to me just last week. He said, "It's what happens after that matters, isn't it?" Would you please stand?